Everyone involved in assisting Jeffrey Epstein in running an international trafficking organization or involved in directly purchasing access to young women through Jeffrey Epstein or directly abusing young women proffered by Jeffrey Epstein, every single person, let the chips fall where they may. No matter how rich the person is, no matter if they held office in the past, no matter if they aspire to office in the future or sit in office right now, no matter how famous or not famous they might be, let the chips fall where they may. That's the vision of equal justice under the law. Mr. President, just minutes ago, I was outside and I was running up the steps to the Senate chamber in order to cast a vote on the issue before the Senate. And the issue before the Senate was whether or not we would pass a bill to release the Epstein files. As you run up those stairs, if you look back over your shoulder, you see there carved into the facade of the U.S. Supreme Court the 4 words, equal justice under law. Equal justice under law. What does that mean to us who grow up in America? It means that nobody is above the law. Not a politician, not a celebrity, not a billionaire, no one. Now, we certainly know that this vision to which we aspire, equal justice under the law, has not been fully accomplished. But we wrestle to move closer to that vision, to realize that vision. And today, we had a chance as the U.S. Senate to move significant stride in the direction of saying no one is above the law. The legislation that was considered was an amendment form of a proposal that I had drafted to say, release the Epstein files. And my co-pilot, Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, saying, release the Epstein files. And indeed, many members on both sides have believed in this vision of transparency and accountability. Why? Well, because they value those words that are carved above the pillars of the Supreme Court, equal justice and law. They cherish that value in their heart, that we aspire towards a vision where everyone is accountable. Plus, in this particular case involving Jeffrey Epstein, every single one of us, all 100 senators, know that Jeffrey Epstein was a monster who groomed and abused underage children, a monster who trafficked girls to rich and powerful men, a monster who destroyed the lives of hundreds of young women. As I speak, the U.S. Department of Justice has files detailing the names of those connected to Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. It's been widely reported that in May, our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, informed President Trump that his name appears in the Epstein files. But to be clear, just because a name is listed in the Epstein files doesn't mean that that person was a collaborator in abusing young women. There may be lots of names in that file related to just casual acquaintances or people met on trips, who knows? But some of those names in that file may well shine light on people who abused young women. So let's bring it to light. If we believe in that vision of equal justice under law, if we believe in accountability for all, then release the files. Let the chips fall where they may. It is the right thing to do. Everyone involved in assisting Jeffrey Epstein in running an international trafficking organization or involved in directly purchasing access to young women through Jeffrey Epstein or directly abusing young women proffered by Jeffrey Epstein, every single person, let the chips fall where they may. No matter how rich the person is, no matter if they held office in the past, no matter if they aspire to office in the future or sit in office right now, no matter how famous or not famous they might be, let the chips fall where they may. That's the vision of equal justice under the law. Everyone involved in Mr. Epstein's crimes must be brought to light and must be held accountable. My colleague from Oregon, Senator Ron Wyden, and the Senate Finance Committee have been investigating Mr. Epstein's financial network for the last 3 years. The Biden administration fully cooperated with the Senate investigators on that case. The Finance Committee staff went to the Treasury Department to see the Epstein files and suspicious activity reports. Democrats understood that this was an ongoing investigation. We applauded the Biden administration for cooperating, and that was the right course. But now we're under a different administration. Instead of cooperating, the Trump administration is obstructing. The Trump administration and Attorney General Bondi are refusing to cooperate, and they are refusing to investigate further. They're simply saying 2 words: case closed. Case closed? When they have their hands on information potentially regarding dozens or hundreds of individuals who abused young women. So today we had a chance to vote on whether the case is closed. We had before us an amendment which said, deliver the files. Create the force of law, deliver the files. And 51 senators in this body, I am ashamed to say, said, hell no. We want them kept secret. We want to protect the perpetrators. Why? Because the man in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump, told us he wants us to protect those files, does not want them public. On July 17th, the Wall Street Journal reported on a letter allegedly written by Trump to Epstein as part of a birthday book for his 50th birthday in 2003. The letter is signed at the bottom, Donald. It features a drawing of a woman's body with very suggestive text. I debated putting that letter up. There's a chart of it in the door behind me, but it's already been made public. The public has seen it. I find it a profoundly offensive letter. And as I passed by a stack of newspapers today, I saw a series of examples of Donald Trump's signature because Trump has said to the world, it's not my signature. But of course, the experts say that's not true. The birthday book contains another photo of Mr. Epstein holding an oversized novelty check from DJ Trump for $22,500. What is that check for? Underneath the photo, taken in the 1990s, a handwritten note says, quote, Jeffrey showing early talents with money and women. Cells fully depreciated, and then there's a name of a woman who's been blocked out to Donald Trump for $22,500. I don't know if a woman was sold to Donald Trump for $22,500. I don't know what it means to call a woman fully depreciated. I don't know if it was just kind of a brazen joke between a couple of very powerful men, but it's certainly not a funny joke. It certainly implies and suggests a camaraderie in the idea that young women are for sale. On July 15th, House Speaker Mike Johnson told CNN, we should put everything out there and let the people decide it. Well, actions are more powerful than words. The words were, we should put everything out there. The action was he adjourned the House of Representatives early for August recess to avoid voting on release of the files. Well, the House is back in session now. So I call on Speaker Mike Johnson to stand up for the principle carved above those pillars on the Supreme Court, equal justice under law, hold a vote in the House of Representatives on release of the files. The leader of the Senate told Fox News, I always am a believer in transparency. I think more is always better. The day we voted on transparency and the vote from across the aisle was case closed, no transparency, no accountability. I certainly agree with the sentiment. It's time to put everything out there. The American people have been clear. They want these files released because they still treasure the idea that possibly powerful people in this chamber actually believe in the principles that we were raised on here in the United States of America of equal justice under law, that nobody is above the law. Still cherish that little seed of hope that maybe when we have a vote in this chamber, 100 senators will say, hell yes. But today, they were crushed because the majority said, hell no. Seal the file, protect the president, protect the powerful. To hell with justice for the victims, the young women who were so impacted, devastated by the activities of Jeffrey Epstein and his associates. The American people know better. They demand transparency. They demand accountability. They demand justice. The victims demand transparency. The victims demand accountability. And the victims demand justice. And we had a chance to deliver today, and we failed them. My bill, which was introduced as the amendment by Senator Schumer, requires the Attorney General to release all materials and records related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, including the flight and travel records, the names of individuals, the names of businesses and nonprofits and other organizations, any immunity deals, any non-prosecution agreements, any plea bargains, any settlements, internal Department of Justice communications about decisions to charge or not charge those involved, all communications about attempts to conceal information or documents, and any documentation related to Mr. Epstein's detention or death. It makes one exception, and that exception is deleting the names of the victims involved. They should only be named if they choose to come forward. Let me quote from what this bill requires. No record should be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of any of the following: embarrassment, reputational harm, political sensitivity, including any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. But it will redact names of the victims and underage witnesses, including their personally identifiable information, depictions of their abuse, or information that jeopardize an active federal investigation or national security. This was carefully crafted with the insights of law enforcement to hold people accountable and redact only what was necessary to protect either an ongoing investigation or to protect the victims. We had a chance to do the right thing today, and 49 senators said do the right thing, and 51 said no and tabled this bill. I hope my colleagues who voted to table the bill today will search their hearts and come back and say, bring it up again, because I want to be on the right side. I want to be on the right side of the principle. I want to be on the right side of the victims. I want to deliver on that little seed of hope that somehow, when push comes to shove, some powerful men in this chamber will hold other powerful men accountable. On behalf of every citizen who shares that vision across our country, who believes in the words carved above the Supreme Court, I and others will continue to press for accountability, for transparency, for justice. May it be so that we reconsider and 100 senators team up together to say hell yes on those core principles we cherish as Americans. Thank you, Mr. President.
What happened on the Senate floor today wasn't an abstract procedural fight. It was a test of a single foundational idea: equal justice under law. Those 4 words are carved into the Supreme Court for a reason. They are meant to remind us that the law should apply to everyone, regardless of wealth, fame, or power. Senator Merkley stood up and said what the vote proved. When push came to shove, the Senate chose secrecy over sunlight, and for too many survivors, that choice feels like another betrayal. So let's be precise about what we're talking about when we say the Epstein files. These are not gossip or hearsay. The term refers to a wide swath of government records, investigative files, grand jury materials or summaries, non-prosecution agreements and plea documents, flight manifests and travel logs, bank records and suspicious activity reports, internal Department of Justice communications about charging decisions, and documentation about detention or the circumstances around Epstein's death. Taken together, that kind of material can show patterns and networks. Who flew with whom, who sent money, who arranged travel, who negotiated deals that let powerful actors avoid prosecution. That is why victims, investigators, and many lawmakers have insisted the files be released with sensible redactions for victim privacy and active investigations. Opponents of release will point to familiar legal and procedural reasons: grand jury secrecy, ongoing investigations, privacy concerns, and national security. Those are valid constraints in some cases, and Merkley's bill explicitly carved out protections for victims and legitimate investigative needs. But there's an important distinction between legitimate law enforcement secrecy and blanket secrecy that shields reputations. Transparency advocates aren't asking for careless exposure of victims or jeopardizing active prosecutions. They asked for a careful, law enforcement-informed release that redacts what must be redacted and releases the rest. That's what this amendment did. When the Senate refused, 51 senators effectively voted to keep those records hidden. Think about what that looks like from the perspective of a survivor. Many of these women were shamed, silenced, and re-victimized for years. For them, the decision to seal the files isn't a neutral legal outcome. It is a denial of the possibility that their abusers will be fully seen or fully held accountable. It's a message that influence can protect perpetrators from scrutiny. To the public, it sends a signal too. If the most damning files from one of the most notorious trafficking cases of our time can be sealed, what does that mean for other inquiries into powerful people? Another critical piece is how being named in a file differs from being charged. A name in a ledger or a flight log is not proof of criminal guilt. It is, however, a lead. It can show associations worth investigating. Transparency allows journalists, investigators, and civil authorities to follow threads, test claims, and, if necessary, reopen cases. Secrecy stifles that process. It turns suspicion into permanent mystery and leaves victims without the informational tools to pursue truth. There is a civic lesson here, too, about how oversight should function. Congress has the power to demand records and to legislate release when necessary. That's not merely political theater, it's a constitutional check. When members of Congress use that power to protect secrecy, they should expect to be held to account by their constituents. Votes are actions with consequences. Words about transparency matter less than how you vote when the rubber meets the road. We also need to understand the cost of secrecy beyond victims and investigations. Trust in institutions is an asset, and it erodes when people perceive that elites are shielded. That erosion affects everything from willingness to cooperate with law enforcement to basic faith in democratic processes. When a public institution appears to put reputational protection above accountability, the damage is not just symbolic, it is practical and it is long-lasting. So what would release actually accomplish? First, it would let investigators and journalists follow leads that may have been stalled. Second, it would give survivors more agency. For many, seeing corroborating documents can validate their experiences and make it easier to pursue justice. Third, it would strengthen public trust by showing that no case is too politically sensitive for scrutiny, provided that real privacy protections for victims remain in place. That's why the proposed amendment was drafted to protect victims' names unless they chose to come forward, while releasing everything else that doesn't jeopardize an active investigation or national security. That balance is both practical and moral. If you're watching this and wondering what you can do, don't underestimate the power of civic pressure. Call or email your representative and your senators. Tell them you oppose secrecy that shields potential abusers and demands transparency consistent with victim protection and ongoing investigations. Here is a simple script you can use when you call. My name is, I'm a constituent from, I urge Senator or Representative blank to support the release of the Epstein-related records with redactions only for victim privacy or active investigations, because transparency is essential to accountability. Share the story on social media, sign petitions from survivor advocacy groups, and support organizations that provide services to survivors of trafficking and sexual abuse. If you can, amplify survivors' voices and the recording of independent journalists who are doing the painstaking work of following the paper trail. At the end of the day, this vote is about more than intrigue or headlines. It's a moral decision about whether our democratic institutions will lean toward light or toward secrecy. It's about whether victim voices matter when they conflict with power. As citizens, our role isn't passive. We must insist our leaders choose transparency, protection for the vulnerable, and accountability for the powerful. If you believe, like Senator Merkley argued, that equal justice under law should mean something real, you should act. Call, write, share, and demand this be revisited. Justice delayed here is justice denied, and the only way we fix it is by refusing to let the cover-up stand. If you found this useful, please share this video to help inform others, subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives, and leave a comment telling me what transparency reforms you think Congress should pass. The more we understand, the better we can hold power to account.